everyone, today we're talking about the pros and cons of an epidural. Yes, the epidural, that's always the question, right? To epidural or not to epidural? That is the question. So the biggest pro, which everyone knows, is the pain management. The pain just goes away from those crazy contractions, right? So sometimes it goes away all the way, sometimes it's like 3/4 of the way gone, but the relief is significant when you get an epidural. There's no question about it. Another pro to having an epidural is often it will shorten your labor. You see, because when you're in labor and you're having contractions, often women cramp up. We tend to cramp up because the contractions get more painful and it's hard to ride those waves. So what we end up doing is we cramp up, which makes that the contractions don't do their job. They don't open the cervix when we're cramped up. So when we get an epidural and we don't feel the contractions so much, we don't feel the pain, that what ends up happening is that we're able to open up the cervix much faster and the labor progresses much quicker. So that's another pro to having an epidural, is that often, in many cases, the labor will go faster. Another pro to an epidural is that it makes your labor a much more pleasant experience. So, you know, you're there with your husband, with your midwife, doula, your doctor, and you are really present and awake and like fully like there and laughing with the jokes, and you're not feeling the full pain of everything that's going on. And it's a much more pleasant experience. And in general, when most of the time when people have epidurals, they don't come out of labor like very traumatized, which sometimes does happen in natural births, that, you know, the pain is so great and it's very traumatic. So that does happen sometimes. So it's one of the pros of having an epidural. You don't have that trauma. It's like a more pleasant experience. Okay, now for the cons. The biggest con is the risks involved in a lumbar puncture, which is the needle going into your back. That is the biggest risk. It could cause a headache, which I had one of those once. I had an epidural headache, which, you know, those things do happen. Another risk is it's possible to have some kind of nerve damage. Those things also happen. So those are risks, and those are the biggest cons. Another con is the pushing is going to be longer in your labor most of the time, because when you get to the pushing, you can't entirely feel where to push because it's mostly numb down there. So sometimes the doctor or midwife will even request for them to turn down the epidural so you feel a little bit more pain, so you can, you know, feel where to push. Another con to the epidural is that after the labor, you're probably going to be in bed for a while, like at least an hour till they take it out and then you get your feeling back. It's not like you can 5-10 minutes later just, you know, get up, go to the bathroom, take a shower. You are going to be in bed and, you know, not feeling part of your legs. So that's another con. And the last one I want to tell you also is your backache. Sometimes with an epidural, there are people who don't feel backache afterwards, but often you feel a bit of a backache in the place where they put in the epidural. So that's another con. Sometimes it's only a couple weeks, sometimes a few months. And the severity of it really depends on the person, from person to person. So that's another con to having an epidural. But I have to tell you that the biggest one is definitely the relief. There's no question that that's the biggest pro to having an epidural. Everyone says it across the board. When if you decide, let's say in the middle of your labor, that you want to go with an epidural and you hadn't decided that before, like let's say, you know, you decided you're going naturally and then your labor's not progressing and you're in too much pain, then you decide that you want to go with an epidural, you need to make that decision by 8 centimeters before you get to 8 centimeters. Because once you get to 8 centimeters, you're going into what's called transition. And they're not going to give you an epidural. It doesn't matter whether you're in pain or how much longer it's going to take till you get to 10 centimeters or deliver the baby. They're just not going to give you the epidural. So if you want to make that decision in the middle of labor, you got to do it before you get to 8 centimeters. That's where I call like past the point of no return. So just a little personal story. When I was in my first labor, and I'd done some research and spoke to friends and talked to my midwife, and I decided I was going naturally. There was no question, I was going naturally. It's the best way to go. But I hadn't experienced labor before. I didn't know what it was like. So fast forward a little to about 17 hours into labor. We were stuck at 5 centimeters for, I don't know, 5 to 7 hours, and we hadn't progressed at all in those 5-7 hours. And I was in a lot of pain. The contractions were all the time, and I was just not managing. I was crying. I was just like, at that point, I was like, I gave in. I'm like, I want an epidural. I need an epidural. And my husband, my midwife, everyone just, agreed. She's not progressing. She's in pain. We've got to go for the epidural. So it took a while for them to arrive. It seemed like eternity, right? And then they had to curl up in a little ball, and then they poke the needle in your back, and they have to play around until they get the exact right spot. But the relief was unbelievable. Unbelievable, okay? My son is 16 years old now, and I still remember it so clearly that the pain was so great, and all of a sudden it was like miracle. In fact, the funniest part was that afterwards, weeks afterwards, people would like see me or call me or talk to me and say, hey, how was the labor? How did it work out? And I was like, it was a miracle. And they're like, yeah, birth is such a miracle. I'm like, no, not the birth. The epidural was a miracle. I was so amazed at how the epidural could literally take away the pain from like feeling like you're dying to like just like utopia. And also, I had gone through 17 hours and it was only at 5 centimeters. And in the next 45 minutes after I got the epidural, we completely progressed all the way to 10 centimeters to the point where we can push already. Because I was totally relaxed, and I even took like a little bit of a sort of nap. And in those 45 minutes, we managed to completely dilate all the way to 10 centimeters from only 5. So you see that there are benefits to having an epidural, and I did not come out of that birth so traumatized that I didn't want to have another baby. So there are benefits to an epidural. If you're considering them, then everyone should really do what's right for them. And if you do want to make that decision in the middle, that's also always a possibility. Good luck, congratulations. Hope this video has been helpful.